The crystal champagne flute chimed lightly as a silver spoon tapped against it. Laughter, rich and careless, drifted through the massive dining room of the $2 million estate I had spent 3 decades breaking my back to pay for. Every tufted velvet chair around the grand mahogany table was filled with smiling, wealthy faces. Yet, standing in the corner of my own home, holding a simple glass of tap water, I had never felt more invisible. My name is Genevieve. I am 62 years old, and tonight I learned that the most agonizing betrayals do not come with screaming matches or shattered plates. They come dressed in designer gowns, delivered with a sweet, patronizing smile. My sister, Sloane, sat near the head of the table. She was 58, but dressed like a woman 20 years younger, her neck draped in pearls that I had unknowingly paid for when I covered her fake business expenses last year. Beside her stood my mother, Lorelei. It was her 82nd birthday party. She wore a custom silk dress that cost more than my first car, her hair perfectly styled by a professional who had come to the house earlier that afternoon on my dime. She radiated the fake warmth she always reserved for her country club friends, holding her glass high as the room quieted down to listen to her speak. "I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight," Lorelei announced brightly, her voice carrying over the gentle hum of classical music playing from the hidden speakers. "Sloane and I have worked so incredibly hard to curate this wonderful life. We are so blessed to have such a beautiful home to host you all." The guests murmured in agreement and applauded politely. They looked around at the vaulted ceilings, the expensive artwork, the imported rug, assuming it was all the result of Lorelei's generational wealth or Sloane's imaginary business success. No one looked at me. Then, Lorelei's cold eyes drifted past the extravagant floral centerpieces and landed right on me, standing quietly in the shadows near the kitchen door. "And of course," she continued, letting a condescending little laugh escape her lips, "we appreciate Genevieve for letting us stay here. Honestly, she is not really family anymore. She is basically just our financial sponsor, a very diligent landlord who keeps the lights on for us." The room froze. A nervous, uncomfortable chuckle escaped someone near the end of the table before quickly dying away. The wealthy guests suddenly found their plates of roasted duck very interesting. I did not look at the guests. I looked directly at my sister. Sloane did not defend me. She did not object. She did not clear her throat and tell her mother that was a terrible thing to say. Instead, she lifted a hand to her mouth and smirked, her eyes dancing with cruel amusement. She did not even pretend our mother had gone too far. Have you ever realized that your own flesh and blood are the very parasites draining the life out of you? Have you ever felt the exact moment your heart turns from a beating, hopeful thing into a block of solid ice? Listen closely, because what I did next is something they will talk about in this town for the rest of their lives. For a long, agonizing moment, the silence stretched. My knuckles turned white as I gripped my water glass. 60 years. For 60 years, I had chased this woman's love. I had played the good daughter, the reliable workhorse, the savior who always swooped in when things went wrong. I had sacrificed my own youth, my own peace of mind, to make sure she was comfortable. And in one sentence, she had reduced my lifetime of sacrifice to a punchline for her wealthy friends. She had stripped away my humanity and labeled me an ATM machine right in my own dining room. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw my glass at the wall, even though every nerve in my body was screaming for destruction. I simply took a deep breath, feeling a strange, terrifying calm wash over my entire body. I placed my glass gently on the side table. I looked right at Lorelei and offered a small, serene smile that made Sloane's smirk falter for just a fraction of a second. Perfect, I thought to myself, though I kept the words locked behind my teeth. If I am only the landlord, then it is time to start collecting rent. The transition from a desperate daughter seeking approval to a ruthless landlord did not happen by accident. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being the family scapegoat. I quietly slipped out of the dining room while Lorelei seamlessly pivoted the conversation back to her upcoming vacation to Aspen, a trip she had heavily hinted I should pay for. I walked down the long hallway, the sounds of their celebration fading behind me, and descended the stairs into the basement. This was where I lived. In my own $2 million estate, I slept in a converted basement storage room. The air down here was slightly damp, smelling faintly of old cardboard and dust. The ceiling was low, and the single window looked out into a concrete window well. I sat on the edge of my narrow, uncomfortable bed and stared at the gray wall. My mind raced, pulling up decades of memories, each one a heavy brick in the wall of resentment I had just decided to stop fighting. I was no longer the sad, ignored daughter crying in the dark. I was a retired logistics director who spent 30 years learning how to build, manage, and dismantle massive corporate supply chains. I knew how to cut off resources. I knew how to starve an inefficient operation. And my family was about to learn what happens when the supply chain permanently shuts down. I grabbed my laptop from the small desk in the corner. The screen glowed in the dim light, casting harsh shadows across my face. I opened a new file and prepared to pull the plug on their entire existence. Do you want to know what happens when a lifetime of patience finally runs out? To understand the sheer magnitude of their entitlement, you have to understand the museum of pain that was my past. I left home at 18 with nothing but $200 in my pocket and a duffel bag of cheap clothes from a discount store. Lorelai had told me I was too practical, too boring, and lacked the refinement needed to succeed in her social circles. I was the invisible child, the one expected to clean up the messes, but never allowed to sit at the main table. Sloane, on the other hand, was the golden child. For years younger, with bright blonde hair and a terrifying talent for manipulation, she was the center of our mother's universe. While I was working grueling night shifts at a warehouse inventory department and taking community college classes during the day, struggling to afford instant noodles, Lorelai bought Sloane a brand new $30,000 convertible for her 19th birthday. I remember walking 3 miles in the freezing rain to get to my shift, while Sloane complained that her leather seats were too hot in the summer. When I finally landed a junior management position at a major shipping corporation, a job I fought tooth and nail for, no one called to congratulate me. But when Sloane decided she wanted to be a fashion entrepreneur with zero business experience, Lorelai took out a massive second mortgage to fund her boutique. That little vanity project crashed and burned 3 years later, wiping out $150,000 because Sloane spent the business loan on designer handbags and lavish trips to Europe. I built my wealth in the shadows. Logistics is not a glamorous field. It requires brutal efficiency, rational thinking, and the ability to foresee disaster before it strikes. I climbed the corporate ladder step by step. I saved aggressively. I invested every spare dollar into mutual funds and real estate while my peers were buying luxury cars. Eventually, my hard work paid off, and I bought my dream home. It was a sprawling 5,000 square foot estate in a quiet, gated community. It had a massive garden, vaulted ceilings, and a beautiful master suite overlooking a private lake. I had peace. I had quiet. I had finally built a sanctuary where nobody could look down on me. Then, 5 years ago, the phone rang. It was Beatrice, my best friend and a sharp real estate attorney who knew my family's toxic history better than anyone. She warned me a storm was coming, but I did not listen. Lorelai's house had been foreclosed on because she had squandered her savings trying to maintain a billionaire lifestyle on a fixed income. Sloane's latest rich boyfriend had kicked her out after catching her stealing from him. They were broke, desperate, and crying on the phone, begging for my help. My foolish, hopeful heart thought that if I saved them, if I opened my doors and my checkbook, I would finally earn the motherly love I had craved since childhood. I invited them to stay in the guest rooms for a few months to get back on their feet. I should have known better. The invasion was slow, methodical, and utterly devastating. First, it was the living room furniture. Lorelai complained my leather sofas hurt her back and were too modern, so I paid to have them replaced with custom velvet pieces she selected from an outrageously expensive catalog. Then, Sloane complained the guest bathroom lighting was terrible for her skincare routine, so I funded a $20,000 renovation just to get her to stop crying about her pores. The ultimate irony happened 2 years ago. Lorelai sat me down at the kitchen island, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, claiming her knees could no longer handle the stairs to the second floor. She said she felt unsafe, that she might fall and break a hip. She needed the master suite on the ground floor. My master suite. The one I had designed specifically for my own retirement, with the soaking tub and the walk-in closet. I caved. I packed my clothes into boxes and moved my things upstairs. I told myself it was the right thing to do for an aging mother. 6 months later, Sloane threw a massive tantrum about needing a larger closet for her designer wardrobe, which I was secretly funding through a supplementary credit card she swore was only for emergencies. She said the guest room was too small for her creative energy. Before I knew it, I was pushed entirely out of the main living spaces and relocated into the basement, living out of suitcases in a damp storage room while they reigned supreme over the house I legally owned. Every time I tried to establish a boundary, Lorelai would deploy her classic manipulation tactics. She would grasp her chest, hyperventilate, and accuse me of elder abuse. She would cry to her friends on the phone about how cruel her eldest daughter was. Sloane would call me a soulless corporate robot who did not understand family values or emotional support. They weaponized my guilt to finance their luxury. They were not a family. They were a hostile corporate takeover disguised as relatives. Sitting in the basement that night, listening to the muffled sounds of their party guests leaving, I realized the staggering truth. I had allowed this. I had built a fortress of wealth only to hand the keys directly to my worst enemies. But a logistics expert knows how to spot a failing operation. And this one was bleeding me dry. The anger that had been simmering for 60 years finally reached a boiling point. It was not a fiery, explosive rage that made you want to break things. It was a cold, calculating fury. I was going to ruin them, and I was going to do it strictly by the book. But before I could execute my plan, I needed to know exactly how much they owed me. Have you ever dared to calculate the real cost of toxic love? My life had become a pathetic routine of servitude. I was the invisible maid in my own home, catering to women who treated me worse than hired help. Every day followed the exact same agonizing schedule. I woke up at 5 in the morning, creeping quietly up the basement stairs to brew their specific blend of organic, fair trade coffee. I handled the grocery shopping, spending roughly $4,000 a month on imported cheeses, premium cuts of meat, and exotic fruits because Sloane claimed she had a highly sensitive palate and would get migraines from regular supermarket food. I paid for the landscaping to keep the gardens pristine for Lorelai's afternoon teas. I paid the exorbitant utility bills, the property taxes, and the high-speed internet they used to stream movies all day while lounging on my velvet sofas. I even paid $1,500 a month for Sloane's exclusive country club and spa membership, convincing myself it was worth the money just to keep her out of the house so I could have a few hours of precious peace. But the real catalyst, the moment the final string of my patience snapped, had happened just 3 days before Lorelai's infamous birthday party. I had been looking for a small bronze plaque. It was my Lifetime Achievement Award from the logistics firm, given to me upon my retirement. It was the proudest accomplishment of my career, the physical proof that my life of hard work had actually meant something. I had originally placed it on the mantel in the living room, a small testament to the woman who paid for the roof over their heads. But it had mysteriously vanished. I searched the entire house, checking drawers and cabinets, before finally taking the trash out to the main bins in the garage. There it was, tossed casually into the garbage, buried under empty wine bottles, discarded luxury delivery boxes, and rotting food scraps. I pulled it out, wiping coffee grounds and grease off the engraved metal. My hands were shaking. I marched straight into the living room. Lorelai was sitting on the sofa, sipping tea and flipping through a luxury travel magazine, looking for her next vacation destination. Why was my award in the trash? I asked, my voice trembling slightly as I held the stained bronze plaque out to her. She did not even look up from her magazine page. Oh, that old thing? It was just a heavy, ugly piece of junk, Genevieve. It clashed terribly with the aesthetic of the room. Besides, Sloane needed the space to display her new vintage handbag collection. You understand, right? We have to keep up appearances for the guests. People judge you by your living room decor. I stood there, holding the heavy bronze plaque, looking at the cheap, gaudy handbag sitting exactly where my life's work used to be. My chest tightened so much I thought my ribs would crack. I did not argue. I did not scream. I just turned around and walked back down to the basement, placing the dirty plaque on my small desk. Now, sitting in the dark after the party, the memory of that moment fueled my fingers as I opened a fresh Excel spreadsheet. I pulled up years of bank statements, credit card bills, and wire transfers. The blue light of the screen illuminated the cold, hard facts of my subjugation. I created separate columns: groceries, utilities, streaming services, spa memberships, car insurance for Sloane's vehicle, clothing allowances, medical bills for Lorelei's imaginary illnesses. I typed furiously, my fingers flying across the keys as the numbers compounded row by row. For 5 years, I had funded 2 fully grown adults who treated me like dirt on their expensive shoes. When the final sum generated at the bottom of the spreadsheet, I stopped breathing for a second. The number blinked back at me, stark and undeniable. $342,000. That was what my desperate need for a mother's love had cost me. $342,000 in 5 years, poured directly into a black hole of narcissism and entitlement. And that did not even include the market value of the rent they were not paying. I reached for my phone. It was past midnight, but I did not care. I dialed Beatrice's number. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice groggy and thick with sleep. "Genevieve? What is wrong? Are you okay?" "Bea," I said, my voice steady and devoid of any emotion. "You were right. You were right about all of it from the very beginning. I need to take my house back." A long pause hung on the line. I could hear the rustle of sheets as she sat up in bed. Her tone shifted instantly from sleepy friend to predatory lawyer. "I will clear my morning schedule," she said firmly. "Come to my office at 9. Bring everything. The deed, the bills, all of it." I hung up the phone and looked around my depressing basement room. The era of the invisible maid was officially over. Tomorrow, the landlord was stepping into the light. And the rent was going to be devastating. Are you ready to see how fast a golden child crumbles when the gold runs out? The next morning, the sun rose over the manicured lawns of the estate, casting a beautiful golden glow through the massive kitchen windows. For 5 long years, this was the exact time I would be grinding expensive espresso beans, laying out fresh pastries from the local bakery, and ensuring the kitchen island was spotless for when the queens descended from their slumber. I used to wipe down the marble counters twice just to ensure Lorelei would not find a single crumb to complain about. Not today. I walked into the kitchen wearing my comfortable slacks and a simple blouse. I measured out exactly enough coffee grounds for 1 single mug. I brewed it slowly, letting the rich, dark aroma fill the room. I poured my coffee, sat at the large marble island, and opened a novel I had been wanting to read for months. I did not prepare breakfast. I did not slice exotic fruit. I did not warm up any croissants. I just sat in the glorious, undisturbed silence of a house that belonged solely to me. At 9:15, the heavy, dragging footsteps of my sister echoed on the hardwood floor of the hallway. Sloane wandered into the kitchen wearing a silk robe that I had paid for. She rubbed her eyes, yawning loudly, and reached automatically toward the expensive coffee maker. She pressed the button. Nothing happened. She frowned, opening the lid to find it empty. "Where is the coffee?" she whined, her voice raspy and annoyed. "And where are the croissants? You know Mom needs her carbs in the morning or her blood sugar drops." I turned a page in my novel, not bothering to look up. "The landlord provides housing," I replied evenly. "The landlord does not provide breakfast." Sloane stopped dead in her tracks. She turned to look at me, her face contorting into a mix of confusion and deep irritation. "What is that supposed to mean? Are you seriously throwing a tantrum over a little joke Mom made last night? God, you are so sensitive, Genevieve. It is exhausting. Just grow up and make the coffee." I gently closed my book, placing my reading glasses on the table, and looked her dead in the eye. "I am perfectly grown, Sloane. Which is why I am adjusting our living arrangement to accurately reflect my exact role in this family. A landlord does not cater." Before she could launch into her usual high-pitched tirade, I opened the banking app on my phone. She watched, her irritation turning into a tiny flicker of unease as I tapped the screen right in front of her. Click. The weekly professional cleaning service was canceled. Click. The premium grocery delivery subscription was canceled. Click. The platinum supplemental credit card with her name on it was locked, drained, and permanently terminated. Click. The monthly country club and luxury spa membership was instantly revoked. What are you doing on your phone? Sloane snapped, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. Just some administrative housekeeping, I smiled pleasantly, taking a slow sip of my hot coffee. You should probably get dressed, Sloane. You do not want to be late for your deep tissue massage appointment at the club. She rolled her eyes, scoffed loudly, grabbed an apple from the fridge, and stomped back upstairs, muttering about my miserable attitude. I finished my coffee in absolute peace. I washed my single mug, dried it carefully with a towel, and placed it back in the cupboard. Then I grabbed my car keys, walked out the front door, and drove straight to Beatrice's downtown law office. By noon, I was sitting across from Beatrice in her high-rise office, overlooking the city skyline. My phone had been sitting on her desk, face up, buzzing relentlessly for the last 20 minutes. The caller ID flashed Sloane's name over and over again. Finally, Beatrice nodded at me. I reached over, answered the call, and put it on speakerphone so we could both hear. Genevieve. Sloane shrieked, the loud background noise of the country club lobby echoing frantically behind her. My card just got declined. The receptionist literally cut my membership card in half right in front of the mayor's wife. They said the account was terminated. Fix this right now. Transfer funds right now. I leaned into the microphone on the desk. I am afraid I cannot do that, Sloane. As merely a landlord, it would be highly inappropriate and unprofessional for me to fund a tenant's luxury spa days. You psycho. She screamed, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. Mom is going to kill you. We are family. You cannot do this to us. Actually, I replied, my voice dripping with ice. Mom made it very clear last night in front of 50 wealthy guests that I am not family. I am just a financial sponsor. And your sponsorship has officially been pulled. Have a lovely walk home in your tennis shoes. I hung up the phone, swiped to her contact, and blocked her number. Beatrice, sitting across the desk in her tailored suit, raised her coffee cup in a silent, respectful salute. A wicked smile spread across her face. The game had truly begun, and they had absolutely no idea how hopelessly outmatched they were. What would you do if you realized the person paying for your entire life just walked away? Beatrice was not just a lawyer, she was a predator in a tailored suit, and right now she smelled blood in the water. She had known my family since we were in college, and she had spent decades watching Lorelai chip away at my self-esteem. She stood up, walked over to a heavy filing cabinet, pulled out a thick manila folder, and spread the official documents across her massive oak desk. The most important document sat right in the center, gleaming under the office lights. The deed to the property. I want to be absolutely clear on this, Jen, Beatrice said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the heavy parchment paper. This house is in your name. Only your name. There is no family trust, no cosigner, no weird squatter's rights that apply here. You owe them nothing. Zero. They are guests who have overstayed their welcome by roughly 5 years. I let out a long breath I felt like I had been holding for half a decade. They always made me feel like I was obligated, I whispered, staring at my own signature on the deed. Like because they were blood, because she gave birth to me, I was legally bound to take care of them forever. Narcissists weaponize obligation, Beatrice replied sharply, leaning over the desk. But the law does not care about your mother's manipulative tears. The law does not care about family guilt trips. The law only cares about this signature right here. She slid a yellow legal notepad toward me and pulled a silver pen from her pocket. Let us draft the paperwork. If you want to play the ruthless landlord, we are going to do it precisely by the book. First, we need to establish the back rent. You said they have been living there for 5 years, consuming your resources, occupying the master suite, and treating you like unpaid staff. What is the fair market rental value for a fully furnished, luxury 5,000 square foot estate in your gated neighborhood? I did the math in my head, thinking about the recent listings in my area. At least $8,500 a month. Probably more with a lake view. Beatrice grinned like a shark. Perfect. Let us calculate. She grabbed a heavy desk calculator. $8,500 multiplied by 60 months. Her fingers flew over the buttons. She hit the equal sign and turned the digital screen toward me so I could read the number. $510,000. My stomach dropped slightly. I cannot hand my 82-year-old mother a bill for $500,000, Beatrice. That is insane. Even I have a limit to how brutal I can be. Fine, Beatrice compromised, waving her hand dismissively. We will be generous. We will bill them for roughly half that time. Let us call it a flat $250,000 for back rent, damages to your property, and general emotional distress. It is a symbolic invoice. It establishes the new power dynamic. It tells them the free ride is violently over. It sets the stage for the eviction. I nodded slowly, feeling the resolve harden in my chest. Okay, draft it. Next, Beatrice pulled out a standard, ironclad residential lease agreement. She began filling in the blanks. If they want to continue living in the estate, they will need to sign this. Rent is due on the 1st of every month. $8,500 in certified funds. Utilities are not included and must be paid by the tenant. No access to the master suite on the ground floor. No access to the garage. If they refuse to sign this agreement, or if they fail to pay the required amount, this document serves as a formal 30-day notice to vacate the premises. I stared at the paperwork as she printed it out. The black ink looked so final, so terrifyingly real. For a brief second, the old, traumatized little girl inside me panicked. What if they hate me? What if I lose my family forever? What if everyone in town thinks I am a monster? But then I remembered the sound of my mother's voice echoing in the dining room, calling me nothing but a landlord while she wore the silk clothes I bought her. I remembered my life's achievement award sitting in the rotting garbage. The frightened little girl vanished, replaced by the hardened logistics director who knew how to eliminate bad investments. Print it, I said firmly. Beatrice printed the documents, placing them carefully inside a sleek black presentation folder. As she handed it to me, she reached out and grabbed my wrist gently. They are going to fight dirty, Genevieve. They will scream, they will cry, they will call everyone you know and paint you as an evil, heartless monster. Do not engage emotionally. Stick to the facts. Stick to the paper. I took the folder, feeling its heavy weight in my hands. It felt like a loaded weapon. I will be. Thank you. I drove home slowly, letting the reality of what I was about to do settle deep into my bones. I was about to detonate a massive bomb in my own living room. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Sloane's car was parked haphazardly on the front lawn, tire tracks ruining the grass. She had clearly rushed home in a blind panic. I took a deep breath, grabbed the black folder from the passenger seat, and walked through the front door. It was time to collect. Do you think they will finally realize they messed with the wrong woman? The atmosphere inside the house was thick with unbearable tension. As soon as I walked through the heavy mahogany front door, I could hear them whispering furiously in the kitchen. I walked down the hall and found Lorelei and Sloane waiting for me like a tribunal. Sloane was pacing the hardwood floor, her expensive makeup slightly smudged from crying at the country club. Lorelei was seated at the marble island, her arms crossed tight across her chest, her face a mask of furious indignation. "Where have you been?" Lorelei demanded, her voice sharp as a razor blade. Sloane came home in tears. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was for her to have her card declined in front of the entire club? The receptionist laughed at her. Turn the accounts back on immediately, Genevieve. This little power trip of yours ends right now. I walked calmly to the kitchen island, completely ignoring their glaring eyes. I placed the black folder gently on the cold marble surface and slid it across to Lorelei. There is no power trip, Mother, I said softly, keeping my voice perfectly level. I am simply fulfilling the role you publicly assigned me last night. I am the landlord. And landlords require proper paperwork. Lorelei eyed the black folder like it was a venomous snake ready to strike. What is this garbage? Open it, I insisted, gesturing toward the cover. With an exaggerated, dramatic sigh, she flipped open the folder. The first page was the invoice Beatrice had drafted. She read the bold letters at the top, her eyes scanning the numbers. Slowly, her face turned a mottled shade of red. She let out a loud, mocking bark of laughter that echoed off the high ceilings. $250,000? She shrieked, slamming her hand flat on the counter so hard the coffee cups rattled. Are you insane? You are billing your own mother for rent? You said I was not family, I reminded her, my voice eerily calm, refusing to rise to her bait. You said I was just your landlord in front of 50 people. I am merely acting accordingly. You have lived here rent-free, occupying the largest rooms, destroying my personal property, and spending my hard-earned money for 5 years. $250,000 is a very generous discount. Sloane snatched the paper from her mother's hands, reading the bold numbers for herself. Her jaw dropped open. You are out of your mind, she yelled. We are not paying you a single dime. You owe us for putting up with your miserable, boring personality for all these years. Lorelei stood up, pulling herself to her full height. Her physical presence was usually enough to make me cower in fear, but today, she just looked like an angry, desperate old woman. She grabbed the invoice and the lease agreement, her hands shaking with pure rage. You listened to me, you ungrateful wretch, she spat, her eyes wild with fury. I gave you life. You owe me everything. I will never pay you, and I will never leave this house. You would never dare kick your own mother out onto the street. You are too weak. You always have been. With a violent tear, Lorelei ripped the legal documents in half, then into quarters, and threw the shredded pieces violently into the air. The paper rained down on the kitchen floor like a pathetic indoor snowstorm. She smiled, a triumphant, wicked grin, truly believing she had won. Believing she had put her disobedient daughter back in her place. I looked down at the torn pieces of paper scattered across the floor. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not bend down to pick them up. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I had saved earlier that afternoon. I put it on speakerphone and set it on the counter. Hello, Harrison? I said aloud, making sure my voice carried clearly across the silent kitchen. Both Lorelei and Sloane froze, their eyes starting to the phone. Yes, Genevieve, how can I help you? Harrison's smooth, professional voice filled the room. He was the top luxury real estate broker in the city. I would like to move forward with the listing, I said, maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact with my mother. Yes, the $2 million estate. I want it on the market by tomorrow morning. Cash buyers only. We are selling the house immediately. I reached over and ended the call before Harrison could reply. I picked up my phone and smiled sweetly at the two women who suddenly looked as though the floor had completely vanished beneath their feet. Sloane's mouth was open, but no sound came out. Lorelei's face had drained of all its color, turning a sickly shade of gray. You are right, Lorelei, I whispered, leaning slightly across the island. I will not kick you out. The new owners will. The following morning, Lorelei and Sloane decided to leave the house. They were still riding the high of their perceived victory from the day before, assuming my threat to sell the estate was nothing more than a bluff. They dressed in their pristine tennis skirts, grabbed their expensive leather visors, and drove off in Sloane's car to play a round of golf at a public course, since her country club membership had been terminated. They assumed everything would return to normal by the time they got back. They assumed I would be downstairs in the kitchen, brewing their afternoon tea and ready to apologize for my little outburst. They were profoundly wrong. The moment their car disappeared down the tree-lined street, I unlocked the front door and waved in the professional moving crew I had hired at 7 o'clock that morning. 5 burly men in matching gray uniforms stepped into the grand foyer. I did not need to yell or throw a tantrum. I simply handed the foreman a clipboard with a meticulously organized floor plan. I need the master suite on the ground floor entirely emptied, I told him, my voice steady and professional. All the clothing, all the designer handbags, all the vanity mirrors, and the custom velvet furniture must be moved down into the basement storage room. Then I need my antique oak bedroom set brought up from the basement and placed exactly where it used to be in the master suite. The foreman nodded, rallying his crew. For the next 3 hours, my house transformed into a whirlwind of glorious efficiency. I stood in the hallway, sipping a glass of iced water, watching as my sister's absurd collection of expensive shoes was carried away in heavy cardboard boxes. I watched as my mother's ridiculous vanity table, the one she demanded I buy for her arthritis, was hauled down the narrow basement stairs. There was no shouting, no crying, no emotional manipulation. There was only the beautiful, rhythmic sound of heavy boots doing exactly what I paid them to do. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the job was done. The master suite was mine again. The scent of Lorelai's overpowering floral perfume still lingered in the air, but the room itself had been restored to its former glory. My heavy oak bed, the one I had saved up for years to buy, sat proudly in the center of the room. My simple, practical clothes hung in the massive walk-in closet. Downstairs in the basement, Lorelai and Sloane's extravagant belongings were crammed into the dark, damp space I had occupied for the last 2 years. I paid the movers, tipped them generously in cash, and locked the solid oak door of the master suite from the inside. Then I went into the kitchen, made myself a simple turkey sandwich, and waited. At exactly 3:15, the front door swung open. Lorelai's loud, demanding voice echoed through the foyer. "Genevieve." She barked, her golf cleats clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. "Get my bath ready. It is scorching outside, and my back is killing me. And make sure you put out the good towels, not those cheap ones you bought last week." I sat at the kitchen island, taking a slow bite of my sandwich. I did not say a word. I just waited for the inevitable. Sloane was the first to walk down the hallway toward the master suite. I heard the brass handle jiggle. Then I heard it jiggle again, much harder this time. "Mom?" Sloane called out, her voice laced with confusion. "The door is locked." "Why is the door locked?" I heard Lorelai huff in annoyance, marching down the hall. "Genevieve, open this door right now. What is the meaning of this childish nonsense?" I wiped my mouth with a paper napkin, stood up, and walked out into the hallway. I looked at the two of them, standing in front of my bedroom door like angry toddlers who had just been told the candy store was closed. "That is my bedroom," I said evenly. "The rooms for tenants who do not pay rent are located in the basement. Your belongings have already been relocated there. I suggest you go unpack." For 3 full seconds, neither of them moved. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Then, the reality of the situation crashed down on them. Sloane let out a blood-curdling scream. "You moved my things? You touched my clothes? You psycho." She lunged at the door, pounding her fists against the heavy wood. "Let me in. Let me in right now." Lorelai's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at my face. "You have lost your mind, Genevieve. I am calling the police. I am having you arrested for elder abuse and theft. We will see how tough you act when you are sitting in a jail cell." I gestured casually toward the living room. "The phone is on the wall, Mother. Feel free." She marched over, dialed the emergency number, and put on the performance of a lifetime. She wept, she wailed. She claimed her deranged daughter had locked her out of her own room and stolen her medication. 15 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway. 2 officers stepped out, looking tense and prepared for a violent domestic dispute. Lorelai met them at the door, tears streaming down her face, playing the fragile, victimized old woman to perfection. "Officers, thank God you are here," she cried, grabbing one of their arms. "My daughter has gone insane. She threw all our belongings into a dark basement and locked us out of our own rooms. She is trying to kill me." The taller officer looked at me, his hand resting cautiously on his belt. "Ma'am, is this true? Are you withholding medical supplies from your mother?" I smiled politely, stepping forward with the black folder Beatrice had given me. I handed him the deed to the house and my photo identification. "No, officer," I replied calmly. "This is my property. I am the sole owner. These 2 women are non-paying guests who have occupied my home for 5 years. I simply moved their belongings to another room in the house because I am putting the estate on the market tomorrow. As you can see, there is no lease, no rental agreement, and no theft. All their belongings are safe downstairs. The officer reviewed the paperwork. He looked at the deed, looked at my calm demeanor, and then looked at Lorelei, whose fake tears were rapidly drying up as she realized her performance was failing. "Ma'am," the officer sighed, handing the papers back to me. "This is a civil matter. Your daughter owns the house. She has the right to decide who sleeps in which room. If you are unhappy with the living arrangements, you need to find a new place to live. We cannot force her to unlock that door." Lorelei's jaw dropped. "But I am her mother," she shrieked, dropping the fragile old lady act instantly. The officer shook his head, clearly exhausted by the drama. "Have a good evening, ladies. Try to keep the noise down." As the police cruiser pulled away, the silence in the house was deafening. I looked at Lorelei and Sloane. The power dynamic had shifted so violently they could barely stand upright. "Your new bedrooms are downstairs," I said, turning my back on them and walking into my restored sanctuary. "Have a wonderful night." The next morning broke with a crisp, clear blue sky, a stark contrast to the dark storm brewing inside the house. I woke up in my own bed for the first time in 2 years. The mattress felt like a cloud. I walked into my private bathroom, ran my hands over the cool marble vanity, and smiled at my own reflection. I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist executing a flawless exit plan. At 9 o'clock sharp, Harrison, the luxury real estate broker, pulled into the driveway in his sleek black sedan. He was followed closely by a small truck carrying a massive, wooden sign. I walked out onto the front porch with a cup of coffee in hand, watching as his team began digging a hole right in the center of my manicured front lawn. Lorelei and Sloane had barely slept. They had spent the entire night complaining loudly in the basement, their voices carrying up through the floorboards. When Lorelei heard the sound of shovels hitting the dirt, she marched up the stairs and threw open the front door, wearing a wrinkled nightgown, her hair sticking out in wild directions. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her voice cracking as she stepped out onto the porch. Harrison tipped his head politely. "Good morning, ma'am. We are just installing the listing sign. We have an open house scheduled for this weekend." Lorelei's eyes widened as she read the bold letters on the beautiful wooden post, "For sale. Exclusive luxury estate." "No," she screamed, launching herself off the porch and running across the grass. "You cannot do this. This is my home. You take that sign down right now before I sue your entire brokerage." She grabbed the edge of the heavy wooden sign and tried to pull it out of the ground, grunting and straining, looking utterly ridiculous in her expensive nightgown. Harrison, maintaining the flawless professionalism of a man used to dealing with eccentric wealthy clients, took a step back and raised his hands. "Ma'am, please step away from the sign," he said firmly, dropping the polite customer service tone. "This property is legally owned by Genevieve. If you damage this sign, I will have to call the authorities for destruction of private property." Lorelei let go of the wood, breathing heavily, turning her furious gaze toward me. "You are a monster, Genevieve. You are a cold, heartless, disgusting excuse for a daughter. Wait until the family hears about this. Wait until everyone knows what you are doing to your own flesh and blood." She stormed back inside, slamming the front door so hard the glass panes rattled in their frames. I took a slow sip of my coffee, nodded at Harrison, and said, "The sign looks wonderful, Harrison. Let us aim for a quick close." By noon, the psychological warfare began. Lorelei had activated her network. In toxic family dynamics, there is a term for the people the narcissist uses to do their dirty work: flying monkeys. They are the relatives, friends, and enablers who are fed a twisted version of the truth and sent out to attack the victim on behalf of the abuser. My phone started buzzing relentlessly. The caller ID flashed the name of my Uncle Julian, Lorelei's younger brother. Julian was a loud, overbearing man who had always favored Lorelei and treated me like an afterthought. I let it ring twice, took a deep breath, and answered. "Genevieve." Julian roared into the receiver, not even bothering to say hello. "What the hell is wrong with you? Your mother called me sobbing hysterically. She says you locked her in a basement and you are selling the house out from under her. Have you lost your damn mind? She is an 82-year-old woman. I leaned back in my living room chair, looking out the window at the beautiful for sale sign. Hello, Uncle Julian. It is nice to hear from you too. It has been, 3 years since you last called? Do not get smart with me, little girl, he yelled. You are a heartless, evil woman. Family takes care of family. You do not throw your own mother out onto the street just because you are having a midlife crisis. You need to take that sign down right now and apologize to her. I let him rant for another 2 minutes, listening to the predictable script of guilt and shame he was trying to force down my throat. When he finally stopped to take a breath, I struck. Uncle Julian, I said softly. Do you know how much money Mother and Sloan have spent living in my house over the last 5 years? I do not care about money, he snapped. This is about family loyalty. $342,000, I stated clearly, enunciating every single syllable. That is exactly how much of my retirement savings they have drained, not including the rent they never paid. They have treated me like a servant, destroyed my property, and told me in front of 50 people that I am not even family. So, since you care so deeply about family loyalty, I have a fantastic solution. Julian went dead silent on the other end of the line. I am selling the house, Julian. They have 30 days to vacate. Since you are so disgusted by my behavior, I will be sending them to live with you in your house next month. I hope you have an extra room for Sloan's designer handbags. Also, you will need to prepare about $5,000 a month just to cover their basic grocery and luxury demands. I will tell Mother to pack her bags and head your way. Thank you for stepping up, Uncle Julian. You are a true family man. Wait, Genevieve, hold on a second, Julian stammered, his loud, bullying tone vanishing instantly, replaced by sheer panic. I did not say they could live here. My wife is sick and we do not have the space, and my pension is fixed. Oh? I interrupted, letting a cold laugh escape my lips. I thought family took care of family, Julian. Or does that rule only apply when I am the one paying the bills? Genevieve, be reasonable. I am being entirely reasonable. They will arrive on the 1st of the month. Good luck. I hung up the phone and blocked his number. He never called back. He did not call Lorelei either. In fact, for the next 6 months, Uncle Julian became a ghost, terrified that if he showed his face, he would be stuck footing the bill for his sister's luxurious lifestyle. The flying monkeys always scatter when you hand them the invoice. I sat alone in the living room, feeling lighter than I had in decades. The house was going on the public market tomorrow for $2,200,000. The trap was set. All I had to do now was watch them realize there was no way out. What would you do if your entire family turned against you, only to run away when you asked them for help? The following Saturday was the day of the public open house. Harrison had executed a brilliant marketing campaign. The listing photos made the estate look like a palace, highlighting the soaring ceilings, the custom hardwood floors, and the breathtaking view of the private lake. By 10 in the morning, a line of luxury cars began forming along the curb of our quiet street. Wealthy investors, young affluent couples, and curious neighbors were all eager to see the property. Lorelei and Sloan, realizing that their screaming matches and phone calls to relatives had failed to stop the sale, decided to employ a new tactic: public sabotage. They emerged from the basement looking like extras in a tragic play. Sloan, who usually would not be caught dead without full contour makeup and a designer outfit, wore a pair of faded sweatpants with a visible stain on the knee and an oversized, wrinkled T-shirt. Lorelei had deliberately messed up her hair, refused to wear her dentures, and draped a ratty, moth-eaten shawl over her shoulders. They shuffled into the grand living room just as Harrison was setting out the catered pastries and champagne for the potential buyers. Their plan was obvious. They were going to sit right in the middle of the house, look pathetic, cry loudly, and tell every prospective buyer that an evil, abusive daughter was throwing a poor, defenseless widow out onto the street. They wanted to make the buyers so uncomfortable that they would turn around and walk out. But I had spent 30 years in logistics. I never walked into a situation without anticipating the worst-case scenario and preparing a countermeasure. As Lorelei dramatically collapsed onto the velvet sofa, letting out a loud, theatrical sob, the doorbell rang. It was not a buyer. It was the two men I had hired from a private, elite security firm. They walked in wearing immaculate black suits, earpieces, and stern, unyielding expressions. I walked over to the security guards, handing them each a cup of coffee. "Gentlemen," I said loud enough for Lorelei and Sloane to hear. "Those two women on the sofa are disgruntled, non-paying tenants who are currently facing eviction. They're highly emotionally unstable. Your job is to stand directly next to them for the duration of this event. Do not let them speak to the buyers. If they attempt to cause a scene, escort them back to their basement rooms immediately." The taller guard nodded, walking over and standing right behind Lorelei's sofa, crossing his massive arms over his chest. He looked down at her with cold, professional indifference. Lorelei stopped crying mid-sob. She looked up at the giant man in the black suit, her mouth hanging open. Sloane shrank back into the cushions, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Their grand performance had been shut down before the curtain even opened. For the next 4 hours, Harrison conducted the open house with flawless grace. Buyers walked through the sunlit rooms, admiring the architecture and the pristine gardens. Whenever they wandered into the living room and noticed the two miserable women sitting rigidly on the sofa with security guards hovering over them, Harrison would offer a charming, dismissive smile. "Oh, please ignore them," Harrison would whisper smoothly to the buyers. "The current owner is dealing with some stubborn squatters in the basement unit. They will be legally removed before closing. Now, let me show you the magnificent master bath." The buyers, used to the bizarre realities of high-end real estate, simply nodded and moved on. Lorelei and Sloane were forced to sit there in silence, wearing their ugly clothes, watching strangers measure the walls and discuss tearing out the kitchen cabinets. They had to watch their kingdom being auctioned off right in front of their eyes. The humiliation was palpable. I stood in the corner, sipping sparkling water, feeling a profound sense of justice wash over me. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a well-dressed couple in their late 30s walked through the front door. The husband was a tech executive and the wife was an architect. They did not just like the house, they fell in love with it instantly. They walked through the master suite, admired the view of the lake, and immediately pulled Harrison aside into the dining room. I watched from the kitchen as Harrison nodded, pulling out his tablet. 10 minutes later, he walked over to me, a massive smile spreading across his face. "Genevieve," Harrison said, keeping his voice low but buzzing with excitement. "They want to bypass the bidding war. They're offering $2,400,000. All cash. No contingencies. They want a 30-day closing period. $200,000 over the asking price. In cash." I looked over at the living room sofa. Lorelei and Sloane were watching us, their faces pale, realizing that a deal was being struck. "Accept it," I said. "Have them sign the preliminary paperwork right now, right here on the kitchen island." Harrison ushered the couple into the kitchen. He pulled the digital contract up on his tablet. The husband signed his name with his finger, followed by the wife. I signed my name last, legally binding the sale of the estate. When the couple left, the house grew quiet again. The security guards took their leave. Harrison packed up his brochures, shook my hand warmly, and walked out the door. I stood alone in the kitchen, looking at the digital confirmation on my phone. The house was sold. The chapter was over. I walked slowly into the living room. Lorelei and Sloane had not moved from the sofa. They looked up at me, their eyes filled with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "The house just sold for $2,400,000 in cash," I announced, my voice echoing in the large room. "The closing is in exactly 30 days. Lorelei's hands began to shake. "You really did it," she whispered, the reality finally shattering her delusion. "Where are we supposed to go, Genevieve?" I looked at the woman who had spent 60 years making me feel worthless. I looked at the sister who had laughed when I was publicly humiliated. "I do not know, Mother," I replied softly, turning to walk away. "But you cannot stay here. Have you ever watched the exact moment a bully realizes they have lost all their power?" The final 2 weeks in the house were a masterclass in desperation. Reality is a brutal teacher, and Lorelei and Sloane were finally being forced to attend the lecture. Without my credit cards, my bank accounts, and my endless patience, they were entirely exposed to the harsh, unforgiving mechanics of the real world. They spent their days huddled over a laptop in the kitchen, frantically searching for luxury apartments in the affluent parts of the city. I would walk past them to get a glass of water and listen to their delusions crumbling in real time. "Look at this one," Sloan would say, pointing at the screen. 3 bedrooms, concierge service, rooftop pool. "It is perfect. Let us just apply for this one." Lorelei would nod vigorously. "Call the leasing office, darling. Tell them we are ready to sign." They would make the call, put on their best, most entitled voices, and demand a tour. But then the leasing agent would ask the inevitable questions. "What is your current household income? Can you provide 2 years of tax returns? What is your credit score? Do you have references from your previous landlord?" Sloan was officially unemployed, having spent the last 5 years calling herself a freelance event manager while organizing absolutely nothing. Her credit score was practically non-existent because she had defaulted on loans years ago, and I had been paying for everything under my name. Lorelei only received a modest Social Security check, which barely covered her monthly wine budget, let alone the rent for a luxury high-rise. One by one, the doors slammed in their faces. They were rejected by the high-end complexes. They were rejected by the mid-tier townhomes. They were even rejected by a modest duplex on the other side of town because they could not put down a security deposit. The world did not care that Lorelei wore custom silk dresses, and the world did not care that Sloan had a sensitive palate. The world only cared about numbers, and their numbers were terrible. On a rainy Tuesday evening, just 10 days before the buyers were scheduled to take possession of the house, the facade finally cracked. I was sitting in my master bedroom, packing a few of my favorite books into a small cardboard box. Someone knocked softly on the heavy oak door. It was a hesitant, weak sound, completely unlike the demanding pounding I was used to. I opened the door. Sloan stood in the hallway. She looked awful. The expensive blonde highlights in her hair were fading, showing dark roots. She had dark circles under her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she was not wearing a drop of makeup. She looked her age. She looked defeated. "Genevieve," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Can I come in?" I did not step aside. I stood blocking the doorway. "Say what you need to say here, Sloan." She swallowed hard, looking down at her bare feet. "We cannot find a place. Nobody will rent to us. Mom is crying every night in the basement, and I do not know what to do. I have $40 in my checking account." I stared at her, feeling a strange lack of emotion. I was not happy she was suffering, but I was not sad either. I was just empty. "That sounds like a very difficult situation," I replied neutrally. Sloan looked up, tears welling in her eyes. Real tears this time, born from genuine fear. "Please, General, you just sold the house for nearly $2.5 million. You have more money than you will ever need. Just give us a cut. Give us $100,000. Just enough so we can pay a year of rent in advance somewhere nice and get back on our feet. You owe us that much as family." There it was. The word family. They always pulled it out like a weapon when they needed something, only to discard it the moment they got their way. I looked at my sister, taking a slow, deep breath. I thought back to the birthday party. I thought back to the laughter, the smirk on her face, the way she had sat there while our mother humiliated me for the entertainment of her wealthy friends. "Sloan," I said, my voice steady and quiet. "Do you remember what Mother called me at the party?" Sloan flinched, looking away. "That was just a stupid joke, General. She was drinking." "She did not mean it." "She meant every single word," I corrected her. "She said I was not family. She said I was just a landlord. And you sat there and laughed. You loved it. You loved seeing me put in my place." I did not mean to. She started crying, the tears spilling over her cheeks. I held up a hand, stopping her. "A landlord does not share the profits of a property sale with their tenants, Sloan. A landlord simply collects the keys when the lease is up. I am not your sister, and I am not your bank. I am just the landlord. And your time is up." I gently closed the heavy oak door in her face, hearing the lock click into place. I stood there for a moment, listening to her sobbing quietly in the hallway before her footsteps dragged away toward the basement. It was brutal. It was cold. But sometimes, the only way to cure a parasite is to completely cut off the blood supply. What would you do if your abuser finally begged for mercy? The morning of the move was gray and overcast, the sky matching the grim reality of the situation. The buyers were scheduled to do their final walkthrough at noon, which meant the house had to be completely empty by 11. I woke up early, dressed in a sharp blazer and slacks, and watched the final act of this tragedy unfold from the kitchen window. At 8 in the morning, a battered, rusted moving truck pulled into the driveway. Lorelei and Sloane could not afford the elite, white-glove moving service I had used to reclaim my bedroom. They had been forced to hire a cheap, discount crew they found online. 2 men in dirty t-shirts hopped out and began haphazardly tossing boxes into the back of the truck. Lorelei stood on the front porch, wrapped in a heavy coat, watching her luxury furniture being manhandled. Her face was pale, her expression hollow. They had finally managed to secure a lease on a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown neighborhood on the far edge of the city. The rent was cheap, the appliances were old, and there was no country club for miles. It was exactly the kind of place Lorelei had spent her entire life mocking. I walked out onto the porch, holding a hot cup of tea. The cool morning air felt incredibly refreshing. I stood a few feet away from my mother, watching the movers struggle to load her velvet sofa into the dirty truck. Lorelei turned to look at me. She looked incredibly fragile, stripped of all her arrogance and false grandeur. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small ring of keys. Her hand trembled as she held them out to me. "Here," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the truck engine. "The keys to the basement." I reached out and took them, slipping them into my pocket. "Thank you," I said simply. Lorelei did not look away. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I saw the mother I had spent my entire childhood desperately trying to reach. The woman I had bought cars for, funded businesses for, and sacrificed my own happiness for. "Genevieve," she said, her voice cracking as a single tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek. "I am so sorry. I was foolish. I was cruel. I took you for granted, and I ruined everything. I know I have no right to ask, but can you ever forgive me? Will you please just call me sometimes?" It was the apology I had waited 60 years to hear. It was the validation I had chased my entire life, the prize I thought would finally fix the broken pieces inside my chest. But as I looked at her, crying on the porch of the house she had tried to steal from me, I realized something profoundly liberating. I did not need her apology anymore. I had already healed myself. I looked into her tear-filled eyes. "I forgive you, Mother," I said softly. Her face lit up with a desperate, hopeful relief. She took a step toward me, opening her arms for a hug. But I took a step back, holding my hand up to stop her. "I forgive you," I repeated, keeping my voice gentle but entirely firm. "But forgiving you does not mean I am going to allow you back into my life. I am letting go of the anger, but I am also letting go of you. This is the last time we will speak. Goodbye, Lorelei." The hope drained from her face, replaced by a hollow, devastated acceptance. She understood. There were no more chances. The well was completely dry. She slowly lowered her arms, gave a small, defeated nod, and turned around. She walked carefully down the porch steps, got into the passenger seat of Sloane's beat-up car, and closed the door. Sloane did not even look at me. She just gripped the steering wheel, staring straight ahead with blank eyes. She put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway, following the rusty moving truck down the street until they disappeared around the corner. The estate was silent. The driveway was empty. A few minutes later, the smooth purr of a luxury engine broke the silence. Beatrice pulled into the driveway in her sleek, brand-new sports car. She parked, stepped out wearing a pair of dark designer sunglasses, and smiled at me. "Ready to go, you ruthless billionaire?" Beatrice asked, popping the trunk for my 2 small leather suitcases. I looked back at the massive $2 million estate one last time. I had paid for every brick, but it had never really felt like a home. It had been a battleground. Now it was just a house I used to own. I grabbed my bags, walked down the steps, and tossed them into the trunk. I am ready, B. Let us get out of here. I climbed into the passenger seat, leaving the past entirely behind me. Do you think true freedom is found in the money, or in the silence left behind by the people who drained you? 6 months later, my life looked entirely different. I did not buy another massive estate in the suburbs. Instead, I took a portion of the $2,400,000 in cash and bought a stunning, modern penthouse apartment right in the heart of the city. It cost $1,500,000, and it was worth every single penny. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling city skyline, a private rooftop terrace where I drank my coffee every morning, and most importantly, only one bedroom. There were no guest rooms. There was no basement. There was absolutely no space for anyone but me. I spent my days exactly how I wanted to. I joined an elite book club, took up watercolor painting, and traveled to Italy for 3 weeks with Beatrice, drinking incredible wine and laughing until our sides hurt. I took a significant portion of the remaining money and set up a private trust fund dedicated to providing scholarships for young women from low-income families who wanted to study logistics and supply chain management. I gave my wealth to people who actually deserved it, people who would use it to build a future, not just buy designer handbags. I never reached out to Lorelai or Sloane, but in a city like ours, gossip travels faster than the speed of light. Beatrice, who always kept her ear to the ground in the high society circles, brought me updates over lunch. The reality of their new life had hit them like a freight train. Sloane, realizing that she could no longer pretend to be a wealthy socialite without my credit cards, was finally forced to get a real job. The 58-year-old golden child, who used to spend $1,500 a month at the spa, was now working 40 hours a week as a cashier at a high-end grocery store just to make ends meet. She spent her days scanning organic vegetables for the very same wealthy women she used to play tennis with. The humiliation had broken her completely. Lorelai was equally miserable. She was trapped in their tiny, damp apartment, complaining to walls that did not listen. Her country club friends had abandoned her the moment she lost her address and her wealth. Without the grand stage of my $2 million estate, she was just an angry, bitter old woman with no audience. They were suffocating in the prison of their own making, drowning in the consequences of their relentless greed. Sometimes, as I stand on my rooftop terrace, watching the city lights flicker to life against the night sky, I think about that birthday party. I think about the moment my mother raised her glass and told 50 strangers that I was not family. At the time, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. But looking back, I realize it was the greatest gift she could have ever given me. She cut the imaginary cord that tied me to her. By declaring I was not family, she freed me from the lifelong obligation of trying to buy her love. She handed me the permission I needed to finally put myself first. People often say that blood is thicker than water. Society conditions us to believe that we must endure endless abuse, manipulation, and disrespect simply because we share genetics with our abusers. We are told to forgive, to keep the peace, to turn the other cheek. But I am here to tell you that family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by respect, by mutual care, and by the way people treat you when you have nothing left to give them. A parasite does not become a butterfly just because you call it your mother. If there is anyone out there listening to this who feels trapped in a cycle of family abuse, who feels like an invisible maid or a financial sponsor in their own life, I want you to hear this loud and clear. You do not owe them your sanity. You do not owe them your wealth. You have the right to close the bank account, lock the door, and walk away. The guilt will fade, but the peace you find on the other side will last a lifetime. So, that is the story of how I lost my family and gained my entire life back. I want to ask all of you watching right now, do you think I went too far by selling the house and leaving my mother and sister to fend for themselves? Or do you think it was the exact reality check they needed to finally grow up? Let me know what you would have done in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Thank you so much for watching. If you connected with this story or have dealt with toxic family members yourself, please hit that like button, Share this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible Reddit stories. Your support helps us keep bringing these dramas to light. Until next time, stay strong, know your worth, and never be afraid to collect the rent.